There are topics that every chess player must know, no matter what. And one of the most important, without a doubt, is knowing how to play with an isolated pawn, both for and against it. What is an isolated pawn, chess teacher? Well, you probably all know, but just in case, let's assume the D pawn is the isolated pawn. It's the most popular one. That means its side pawns don't exist, neither the C pawn nor the E pawn. Therefore, we could have a structure like this where, white has an isolated queen's pawn. So you have to know how to play with the isolated queen's pawn, and you have to know how to play against the isolated queen's pawn. White's plans in this situation? Well then, you should know that the side with the isolated queen's pawn needs to be very dynamic, meaning it needs to carry out attacks. If the side with the white pieces doesn't manage to make quick attacks, it'll reach a losing endgame, because as you can see, one of the strong points this pawn has is that it has a lot of space around it for its pieces to coordinate for an attack. But a very negative point it has is that in an endgame, as you can see, it'll be very easy to attack because no pawn will be able to defend it. So, typical attack plans that white typically carries out are, for example, this battery of the queen on d3 and the bishop on c2 attacking a short castle position. Another very typical plan is to take advantage of this e5 square with a knight, a super good outpost. And the other one, also very typical, is to place a bishop on g5 to support these types of attacks. For example, bishop takes knight and queen takes h7, checkmate. These would be the plans for the white pieces if they have an isolated pawn. You can review what I'm saying several times, okay? And the plan for black is usually always to block this pawn. For example, with a knight is usually the most typical. Why? Because imagine this. If white has such a good attack in exchange for having this isolated and slightly weak pawn, imagine if white manages to make the d4 to d5 break, getting rid of that pawn, meaning they will no longer have any weaknesses. That said, they will still have the same space to attack. Therefore, if white often manages to play d4 or d5 in reversed colors, under good conditions, it will probably be completely decisive for the attacking side. Okay? Therefore, a very typical plan is to block this pawn with the knight so it cannot advance. In many games, it is even sacrificed. Now we are going to see an example of a game that will fascinate you. Another typical plan for the black pieces, I'll say the black pieces, but really for the side that doesn't have the isolated pawn, is very simple. Trade off as many pieces as possible, make many piece exchanges to reach an endgame where this pawn is very easy to attack. What do you think? In this class, I'm going to show you a game on how to play with the isolated pawn in your favor, which we're going to see right now. And if you really like this video and leave a good like, as I always tell you, and I see that you like it and you leave it in the comments, I'm going to make another video with an example of how to play against the isolated pawn. You're going to see that the isolated pawn occurs on many occasions, and you have probably played several games with the isolated pawn and haven't even realized it. The game started with c4, c6, e4. A bit of a strange opening, right? But, well, this game took place in the World Rapid Championship. That means that it is played completely correctly. White is already directly looking to have an isolated pawn. Pawn takes pawn, knight f6. And here, knight c3. White has an extra pawn, but it's quickly recovered here, right? Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. And now, simply, knight takes pawn. Black has recovered that pawn that they hadn't recaptured at the beginning. What do we find here? Well, we can see it, right? The isolated pawn. We have the isolated queen's pawn. Normally, we want to have this pawn on d4. What for? So that the pieces can develop well and, in the future, to be able to place our pawn on d5 to start exchanging it and carry out our type of attacks. My question is, would it be a good idea, for example, for the BL, for the black pieces to try to play e5 to avoid this d4? It's usually not a good idea. It's usually not a good idea because we would already like to exchange this pawn ourselves. This would make the plans for the white pieces easier, do you understand? That is why the move e6 is usually played here. That is to say, if black correctly understands the plans involving the isolated pawn, then they won't easily place the pawn for us to exchange it. Well, the good thing about this class compared to other classes, where I only teach you openings, is that when we study openings, what happens? That many times we play a game, our opponent doesn't do what we've studied, right? And it's a little hard for us to keep going. That's why it's so important to study various strategies, not just the exact opening moves, right? The good thing about this class is that we know what plans we need to execute. That is to say, it doesn't matter to us if our opponent does it well or does it poorly, because it's better if they do it poorly. For example, if we are playing with the black pieces and my opponent with the white pieces doesn't know how to play an isolated pawn, they'll probably trade pieces with me, right? So we will have that certain advantage, right? That's why it's so important to know the plans for the white piece as well. Attacking and not trading pieces and making the break, plans for the black pieces, as we've said, blocking with a knight, right now very correctly placed on the d5 square. So directly, when in the next moves that occurred after bishop c4 and knight c6, before it's too late, look, castling and bishop e7, white already places their pawn on d4. Very well, we have a completely typical isolated queen's pawn position. Why? Because white is developing their pieces very well. They have a lot of space. This file for the rook, this square for the knight, the bishop can come out where we said white is going to try to set up their battery with the bishop and queen. We've already talked about this. And black, what are they going to try to do? Well, as we've seen, blocking the pawn with the knight on d5, they're already doing that very well. And also, well, trying to hold on by trading off as many pieces as possible and defending against white's attacks. However, take a look at the following. Black castles. White takes advantage of the e-file by placing the rook on e1. Whenever we play with the isolated pawn in our favor, the moves are similar because we always try to take advantage of the same things. The open e-file, the knight, the bishop, the queen, the bishop. You know what I mean, right? And try to break on d4 when we can. Very well, after this rook to e1 here, black, I think, makes a small inaccuracy, yeah? This game is commented on by Mauricio Flores in one of his books, and he specifically explains that this move is perhaps not the most precise in the world, knight to f6. The idea is that this knight to f6, although it seems like a very good idea to defend the castling, what is it doing? It's undermining one of the key things that the black pieces need to do against the isolated pawn, which is to block it with the knight. Once the knight moves away, it's true that it still controls the advance from a distance. However, it obviously makes the breakthrough on d5 much easier. Perhaps it would have been a tad more precise to place the bishop on f6. It also provides a good defense for the castling, especially avoiding entries of the bishop to g5, and above all, it keeps this knight blocking the pawn correctly. Why is blocking the pawn so necessary and so good? Because look, apart from the breakthrough, when a knight, for example, is placed in front of an isolated pawn, since it's an isolated pawn, it doesn't have pawns on the side, therefore this knight will never be able to be kicked out by a pawn. The game continues with a 3. Forgive me, this is like this. The knight was played, the game continues with a3. A move, let's set this up correctly, okay? A very interesting move. Why? Because black usually makes plans of this type. Since they've now removed their blocker, maybe they want to place another one. And they could do it, for example, with this maneuver. And this would be impressive for black. The knight defends its other knight that wasn't doing anything. It blocks the pawn. This would be impressive. But with the move a3, it avoids plans of, knight plans to position itself in the blockade of d5, right? In this case, black plays a6. However, this a6 doesn't make much sense at all. On the contrary, it's losing time, and they are losing very valuable time. Here, black's idea is to play a6 and then b5, but you'll see that this doesn't make much sense. The bishop retreats to a2, where it'll be very well placed. Notice what it's going to do from here. If they want, the bishop can switch diagonals to b1, and, together with the queen, create that famous machine to attack black's castled position. Therefore, bishop to a2 is very interesting. And why is d5 not a precise move? Well, if you've been paying attention, you'll understand that white now has an extremely strong move. Let's see. If you manage to find the move, you can pause the video, and now I'm going to tell you what it is. The idea is that the move is undoubtedly the move d5. Who's supporting this pawn? 1, 2, and 3 pieces, but only 2 are defending it, the pawn and the queen. Therefore, here we are, exchanging our pawn with the break at 4, d5. Perhaps one of the most important points of the isolated queen's pawn. If we manage to make this break under good conditions, the advantage will be quite large because our pieces will have much more space to attack. Obviously, there's nothing better here than capturing the pawn, because if the knight moves, for example, let's assume the knight moves, I'm making this up, to a7, although it's not a good move. Come on, let's say, for example, it comes a little further forward to a5. Surely, we don't even need to trade immediately. We could continue improving our pieces. Why? Because if we trade immediately, maybe they would trade queens, and that doesn't interest us as much. But it is true that at any moment we can improve our pieces, and notice how they move wonderfully toward the castled position, and when it's appropriate, well, we trade the pawn, right? The idea is that the best move, without a doubt, for black is at least to capture this pawn. Once captured, what are we going to capture with? With the knight or with the bishop? Well, without a doubt, it is much more important to keep this bishop alive. Therefore, we are going to capture with the knight. We have seen that our most important pieces were the queen, bishop, and knight. Yes? And perhaps this bishop and this rook are also important. The rook controls the e-file. This bishop can be sacrificed on h6 in many positions to completely open up the castle position. Without a doubt, this knight, although all pieces are important, is perhaps the least important of all. Knight takes. And now, although many of you are probably thinking, let's recapture with the bishop because trading queens benefits the black side, here the white player, with very good judgment, captured with the queen, and I'll explain to you why it's such a good move. Right now, queens can't be treated. Can you tell me why black can't capture the queen? Well, if the queen is captured, the bishop on e7 would be lost. And this is very simple to understand. Let's assume that the queen trade happens. It would simply be followed by bishop takes queen. The knight is pinned. Therefore, there is nothing better here than defending the knight with the bishop, because otherwise it'll be lost. And when it is defended, simply bishop takes knight, we eliminate the defender of this bishop, bishop takes knight, bishop takes, and rook takes bishop. You see it? So, it is not possible to trade queens. That's why it's so interesting to capture with the queen, because we activate the queen and don't allow the queen trade. Furthermore, we threaten the knight, which has to be defended, bishop to b7. And now, with very good judgment, we must understand what is happening in the position. We are playing with an isolated queen's pawn position, which we've managed to trade off with the d4-5 break, one of the breaks, or not one of the breaks, no, the essential break of the position, where we often have an advantage even without making it. Imagine if we managed to make it. So now we are going to execute our plan. And what is our plan? To launch a very strong attack against the black king. And as you can see, there is no way to stop the attack. Let me explain. All our pieces are pointing at the castle position, the bishop, the other bishop. This queen now places herself on h5 to come and attack these points directly, right? The knight can jump. Another typical maneuver in the isolated queen's pawn is to bring the rook along the third rank to carry out the attack on the castled position. As you can see, the black player only has one bishop and one rook on the king side to defend against the attack, so they're in quite a bad spot. Very well. What can the black pieces do here? Probably. Many of the moves are already losing blunders. For example, h6 would lose the game immediately. Why? Because we would simply sacrifice our bishop, bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, and taking advantage of this, look, this bishop is pinning this pawn. We would simply slide our queen in, queen g6 check, we would capture this pawn with check, and from here on, it would be extremely simple. Bishop to b1 to threaten mate here. It can only be stopped with f5. The bishop maneuvers back to a2, giving check. They must stop it with the rook, and queen g6 doesn't allow them to keep defending this rook, because it's being threatened by two pieces, and it's also check. If it comes here, it's mate, and if it comes here, it loses the rook, and it's going to be mate in a few moves with a rook down, right? Therefore, we realize that, for example, a move as normal as h6 to stop the attacks would already lose on the spot. Look at how powerful the attack is for the side that has the isolated queen's pawn, and especially if there is no longer any pawn in the middle that can slow down the bishop's attack. How interesting, right? Very well. So what we see here is that now black could play c6. Probably, many of you are thinking. Maybe it's not the best idea, because then we could continue. For example, I'm thinking a queen h6, followed by, for example, the bishop pinning the other bishop. After the exchanges, the other knight would come in, threatening this point that was threatened by the queen and the knight, and it probably can't be saved. Therefore, we can see that black is facing certain dangers and cannot advance any pawn. This one because it's pinned, this one because it gets sacrificed, and this one we just saw. And it can't do anything, you see? They can't advance the pawns. And how do they manage to defend? Well, they don't have it easy at all, not by a long shot. Many of you might be thinking, what if, for example, I place the bishop over here? Well, it would be the same thing. I come in with the other bishop, I force you to trade, then I attack here along with the other bishop. I'm also attacking here with 3 pieces, and this would be quite difficult to defend for the black side by now. Therefore, here black still plays a correct move, which is queen to 7, without placing any piece in a bad spot, right? In this case, we wouldn't be pinning the queen with bishop to g5 anymore. However, it's still the best move. Bishop to g5. Why? Because now, several things are actually being threatened. First, let me explain that the best move is to capture the bishop, and that's what happened in the game. If they try to make any other move, like, for example, let's assume a huge blunder, the rook can't move because then they would lose this point here and probably the game immediately. The rook can't move. Let's assume then that they make, I don't know, they don't want to exchange bishops and play bishop to d6. Then we would simply perform a typical maneuver for these positions, which is to bring the rook into the attack. The next move is going to be rook to h4, and there will be no way to stop the checkmate. The only one would be to advance the pawn, and we have already seen how it ends when they advance the pawn. Do you see it? The number of possible maneuvers there are, and I really can't think of any other option to try to defend. Obviously, this would be the same as before. The queen comes through here after the exchanges. They don't defend against the mate. Therefore, the best move here is to capture the bishop. And, well, once they capture the bishop and we capture with the queen, how can the black pieces defend themselves? Well, now it changes a bit. This move is still bad because it's mate, right? We see that mate in 1 is being threatened, but now the mate can be stopped with the move, h6. And why can it be stopped now with h6 and not before? Because before we were sacrificing the dark squared bishop and opening up the position, do you remember? Now this is no longer possible because the bishop has disappeared. But the thing is, we simply have so many pieces on the attack that this game is completely won. For example, let me explain. Here, there's no need to even retreat the knight. Rook e3 is an excellent move. What are we doing? If black decides to capture the knight, simply rook h3, and you tell me how you stop the mate. It's impossible. We're threatening 2 mates at once, queen h7 and queen h8, and therefore the checkmate can't be stopped, right? So they can't capture the knight. Black could still put up some resistance if they tried to come back with the knight to the e5 square and challenge the center of the board. Even so, they're in extremely bad shape, huh? For example, here, if they played knight e5, probably the move knight e6 would be extremely strong, but it would be the resource that black should have used to try to save themselves. And why is knight e6 strong? Because after the exchanges, you capture here, you threaten this point, you're gonna win a pawn. And this game will probably be decided a little bit slower than what happened in the actual game, but it's really going to be decided almost certainly in favor of the white pieces. Therefore, here we are, going to set this up exactly as it was. The knight didn't come here, but instead, what it did was jump to the side, knight to a5. And obviously, this just makes the problems even worse, because the castled position is becoming more and more vulnerable. And look at what an authentic maneuver the player with the white pieces used, which I assure you, you can be very creative with the isolated pawn. There are many moves that work. This move is wonderful. Queen to g6. Obviously, the queen can't be taken thanks to the power exerted by the Spanish bishop, which is what they call this bishop that always goes along the diagonal from a2 to the g8 square. The queen cannot be taken. The threat is nothing less than checkmate on the h7 square. Therefore, there's no choice but to capture this knight. How do we finish, chess teacher? Well, taking advantage of the fact that the queen is untouchable, rook to h3, and the mate is unstoppable. Black's only hope. Moving the rook away to escape with the game. But the thing is, now there's no need to go in and give checks. Trying to escape through here? Well, this is what's called closing the back door. The king opens the back door to escape. We close it on him with the rook. And, as you can see, all our pieces are in harmony to deliver checkmate. Is there any way right now to stop the checkmate? No, black can resign here, and in fact, they did resign. There is no way to stop the checkmate on the h7 square. Well, let's see. Maybe they could sacrifice the queen and hold on for a few more moves, but it's obvious that it won't do them any good at all. Alright, just so you know one thing. Inside the academy, you have two classes uploaded on the isolated pawn, okay? A 45-minute class, much more complete than this one, obviously, on how to play with the isolated pawn in your favor, and a 45-minute class on how to play against the isolated pawn. Oh, yesterday I also uploaded to the academy a 45-minute class on how to play with the isolated pawn. You're gonna have between 1 and 2 video classes every week, okay? In video format, so you can watch them as many times as you need. I mean, if you join now, all these classes I'm mentioning, and you also have more classes on how to attack the fianchettoed castling, you have several classes that you can watch as many times as you need. Once you join, you'll be able to watch them, okay? You'll be able to review. Oh, and I'll also be uploading them every week, okay? And besides, you'll logically have access to more than 60 opening courses. You have access to strategy mini-games, middle game training, end game training. Well, the academy's the most complete in the world, right? And many of you are asking me, ChessTeacher, I've seen that you have 3 plans available to join, right? I'll clear that up for you, Quizlier. The plans are as follows. I'm speaking in euros because that's the currency I use, okay? You just need to do the conversion if you are in dollars or in any other country that uses a different currency. The monthly plan is 19 euros, okay? In other words, if you pay 19 euros a month, you have full access to the academy, right? It's the most logical plan in the world, right? A small payment, depending on how you look at it. For Spain, which is where I'm from, that's a very small plan compared to everything we're offering you in the academy, I assure you. And so what you can also do is, if you really like the academy, you can pay, for example, for 3 months at once, which works out cheaper, or pay for a whole year at once, which a lot of people are doing right now. Oh, and I thank you, obviously, which is the best value for you, right? But I recommend, friends, if you haven't tried the academy yet, just try it for 1 month. Yeah, try it for a month to see what you think. It'll be a great price, and you have nothing to lose by trying it. I assure you that you'll love it. And of course, if you don't like it, well, you can cancel without any fine print and without any commitment. You just cancel the subscription and that's it, okay? And if you really like it, well, you can continue or you can opt for a bigger plan, okay? That's what I recommend. So it's up to you. I'm going to leave it right here below in the description, chessmind.ai, okay? I'm going to leave it for you right here below in the description, and I recommend that, friends, okay? Try it for a month, yeah? Try it for a month. If you like it, great. You'll study and learn a ton with me, titled Masters and Grandmasters, plus tons of exercises. You'll already know what's there. I'm being really annoying, huh? But I wanted to make this clear. And if you do like that month, okay, what I would do is get a higher plan or not. That's already in your hands, okay? I hope you loved it. It's great to see the academy's resonating with you, so thank you very much. We'll keep working hard to improve it even more. And we'll see each other tomorrow in the next video, friends. Bye.